Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another bright and sunny day. I feel like a radio host. So today, I think it's the fourth of our series, and we've slowly been tackling various elements of high performance in the VUCA world. VUCA standing for volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. And that is the new norm of what we call the post-industrial age. So once again, thank you very much to the TRA and their academy for hosting us and allowing us to share knowledge, which I hope is practical and you're able to implement it. The slide deck is obviously shared afterwards, and there's some questions to help see if it's been a good session or not. So today we have 45 minutes, and we'll be talking about high performance teams in a VUCA world. In other words, how do we have high performance in a system that is very volatile, very uncertain, and very much no longer stable and industrial? This is what we call the age of Agile, or some call the age of digital, and many people now talk about digitalization. And the difference between digitalization today is not that it's digitalizing your workflow, which is simple IT. This is about a digital way of operating. The 12 traits will form the basis of everything I talk about. And I often would ask you to keep coming back to these 12. There are no specific format, no specific order, but just trying to understand what they're saying, I think will give you huge insights on how to remain relevant in a post-industrial age. So once again, who am I? Those of you that have attended previously, you know who I am. So this is more for the people that are new. My name is Ed Capaldi. I'm a Chief Strategy Advisor and Catalyst for what I call high-octane, forward-thinking entrepreneurs. Yeah? An entrepreneur could be someone that owns their own business, or it could be an intrapreneur in an organization or a government entity that wants to drive progress and change because they know the industrial way of doing things have changed. My job is to make people think differently, plan smarter, and therefore deliver faster. My job is to make it easy by using the 80-20 law. So for those of you that know 80-20 or Pareto, it's always aiming at the 20% that gives the 80%. And now let's move on to what we're talking about today. So in 60 minutes, this is what we shall tackle. How to lead a high-performance team in a VUCA world. We'll get you to think differently. As usual, I hope to be provocative because I like to be argumentative, but it's also because without being provocative, you will stay in the status quo. A 2% improvement or a continuous improvement is what everyone is doing. Therefore, it's not good enough. We'll talk about these 12 traits in different ways and really to gain an insight into this new mindset. As before, with the other workshops we've done, it's all about pumping up the power of the team. Today to the future. So even if you do these things a little bit, we should see a 37% improvement. But if you really tackle this properly, and remember, Agile is about the customer and really delivering value to the customer, then you can have huge improvements in performance. So if you do this right and the customer is served, not only do we remain relevant, we can also make a lot more money or have a lot more return on the investments. So if you're a government, you stay relevant because people love the government, they can see the government's giving change, and therefore they are more keen to be part of that government and that entity. If it's a company, the same thing applies. Aristotle, the famous Greek thinker, used to say the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And this is critical. Yeah? Why? So in the industrial age, it's all about me, me, me. Think of American capitalism. Yahoo, let's make loads of money. who gives a damn about society and the rest, yeah? It's all about growth. It's all about power. It's all about money. It's all about me, me, me. And now look at what's happening. China's coming along, other countries are coming along, and the power base is sort of stumbling. Whereas the companies that are succeeding, wherever they are, whether it's Google, whether it's, look at, I think a great example is really Microsoft, right? In the past, it was all me, 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 after Bill Gates, Ballmer, yeah? It's all about the me, me, me. Society is there to make me rich. But now they've started to change. And the reason they changed was they knew they would be irrelevant. They would be dead as a billion-dollar company if they did not change. So there's nothing like being put against a wall to force a change, because then change becomes easier. But if we actually step back and think about it, we realize VUCA means volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. It means that things are going on far too fast, and a lot more things are going on. Therefore, I know as an individual, I can't take the right decision anymore unless I use the power of those around me. And great leaders have always realized a great team accomplishes a lot more than an individual, which is what Aristotle was saying. This is what drove Alexander the Great, you know, a few people going in and taking over the world and still being remembered today for what he did in a 15-year period. It's incredible. So this is what we're trying to do, right? We want to achieve, or what you want to achieve is relevance. You want to keep your job, you want to be part of a great team. Either way, it means surviving as well as retaining the identity of whatever it is that you do. We don't want people anymore turning up just to get their money to go home. This is an incredible challenge here because most workers are expats, which makes it hard, even if you're an expat with your own company, to think to treat my people right, because they're just going to go. They're here just for the money. Well, I question that. Yeah, I came here because, believe it or not, I was sick and tired of living in Europe with all its BS. My dad had often said about this person called Sheikh Mohammed and said, why don't you go check them out? Go and check out this country. At the time, no one knew Dubai. But we did know there was a great leader, yeah, and a bunch of great leaders from Sheikh Zayed. And they were creating the space for people to do great things. Now, people can criticize. It doesn't matter. The key is leadership gave a vision and created space for people to do great work. Therefore, even in a society which is full of expats, it doesn't mean people just here to take their money. They've come here to make money. But everyone likes to belong, and everyone likes to feel important, and everyone likes to take decisions. Everyone likes autonomy. And we'll talk about autonomy today, because these high growth teams, these high performance teams, give autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy is also Greek. Autonomous means self-rule. So when we talk about autonomy in the team, it means you're giving the team the ability to self-rule. The team, not the individual. So what does this mean? We've said this before. Industrial age is dead. More companies are dying than are being born. And the life cycle of companies is half what it was before. Things are changing. So here are some questions for you today. Is your company fit to compete in the post-industrial economy? Is your culture fit to compete? If you or anyone in your team left tomorrow, would the company suffer? If it would, it means you're not a leader of the future, you're a leader of the past. Command and control. I once met a guy, he owned a company, and it was a $4 billion company. The name of that company is HCL Technologies. He's just handed the reins of this company to his daughter. But when I met him 17 years ago here in Dubai, I asked him, what would make me a great leader? And he gave me 3 bits of advice. The third was the one I shall tell you today. Make yourself redundant. And what he was saying was, by becoming redundant, you can work on the business while your people can work on the business and getting it doing things, which is answering this question here. You should be redundant. If you left tomorrow, the company performance would not suffer because you have created an awesome team. The last question I'm asking here is the key seats, the key positions in your company. What do you need moving forward? Have you got 90% of those seats filled with the right people? This is pure Jim Collins. Right? If you know the right seats, have they got the right people in there? If not, then of course you're going to suffer. So today we're going to talk about the power of teams, self-organizing teams, the ability to have radical transparency, the whole thing about no preferences, mutual trust and respect, which will lead to this pay fairly and ultimately to something which not many people like, and that is profit share. So one thing, Peter Drucker in the 1950s or early 60s, the ability to make good decisions regarding people represents one of the last reliable sources of competitive advantage, since very few companies are any good at it. Most companies are awful at hiring the right people. And then they fire them because they're the wrong people and blame them. They don't take the ownership. They play victim. The wrong hire. It's the person's fault, not your process of hiring. And in the process of hiring, you need to be clear about who it is that you want to hire. But if you can get this right and then create the right environment for them, then you will succeed in this VUCA world. In fact, many of the companies I work with, they haven't really been hit hard by VUCA. Now, obviously, markets have collapsed. Some have had their guts ripped out of them, but they've adapted and changed because they haven't played victim. They've played the part of leadership. So if you think about it, in the past, we built pyramids, right? We built great buildings, the great societies of Rome, of Persia, of India, or whatever. But they're all command and control. There was less volatility. There's a lot more productivity. But the real reason was people were not so educated, right? And not only that, but they didn't need to be that educated because there's less going on. So it's easy to become command and control because you stood at the top as the big boss or the king, and you told everyone what to do because no one had Google. No one had education. But today, everyone is an expert, which means anyone can second guess you or ask more questions, which puts you into an uncomfortable position, which usually reacts in you playing the victim and firing them or telling them to shut down, dumbing them down, because you do not like to lose face. So what does this mean? Well, if we step back and just look at the beginning of this year, you probably had, revenue was planned to grow. Naturally, your costs were planning to grow, but your profit, you're hoping to grow as well. As performance increases over time, this was the plan. Then, of course, something else happened. COVID. At which point, because you already invested, your costs are still going up. But of course, now the reality is markets have collapsed. And now it's a time for rebuilding, building more resilience. And if you have a great team, that's going to be a lot easier than a bad team. But bad teams are nothing compared to bad leaders. Leadership is core, and the way leadership is changing is core. And this is all about the command and control. As you saw in a previous slide, this is where things are changing. Yeah? Today, we need to be more agile, as in faster, smarter at delivering value to the customer, not just faster and smarter. Delivering something faster, which adds no value to the customer, whether it's a government delivering a service or a company selling chocolates. Agility is now core as opposed to predictability. The rigid organizational structure, boss, second boss, third boss, fifth boss, 10 layers, is giving way to very fluid boundaries. Like we saw in the last presentation, the Agile company doesn't even have necessarily C-level. Right? I spoke of Salim Bassoul, the Lebanese guy who went to America, ran a company called Middleby, one of the world's most successful companies. 1 in every 3 kitchens are built and sold by his company. He achieved that in 20 years, and there they have 3 layers and 10,000 employees. 3 layers. That's 700 people reporting to each VP. And if you remember, when I asked them, well, how do you manage 700 people? They said, well, why the heck would I want to manage? And that's the key thing going on now. Do I manage or do I lead? The systems are self-managing. Teams have autonomy. They also have the ability to self-organize, self-manage. Management is a layer that slows you down. But of course, you can't give up management unless you have the right metrics and the right culture. But we do want entrepreneurs as well, people that question the status quo all the time, people that actually come up to you and harass you as the boss saying, I don't think this is right. What about this? What about that? And you listen to them because you know they're probably right, because they are nearer to the front line than you are. Another key point is profit is no longer the core driver. It's also purpose, especially for the younger generation. So whereas the industrial age may not yet be dead, it's dying, but we're definitely not at its knocking door, the digital age is still not stable. So we're living in the middle, which is why it's so VUCA. As we transfer from one way of living to a new way of living, digital becoming the core, things are becoming very, very, it's almost like being a teenager, right? Those adolescent years that we'll look back with and think, oh my God, did I really do that? Well, that is society today as it moves from industrial to digital. We have so much data, so much uncertainty, and a whole generation of X or whatever they're called that don't want to work the way that the older generation worked. So it's chaos. And we need a new system. We have to have a new system. And that means being focused on the customer more than the shareholder. Right? It means we start looking at crowdsourcing and global workforce as a new norm. We can thank COVID for this. One of my early jobs 20 years ago was a company we invented what we now call cloud computing. We were delivering cloud computing in 1999. We knew then anyone could work from home. But of course, people refused to accept that command and control. But now it's been forced on society and people are going, oh, wow, this works. It's nothing new. 20 years ago, this has started to happen. But what this does now mean is awareness. One of my clients in Italy, in the north of Italy, it's a bank. They're based out of a small place called Biella, which is a very small town. The biggest challenge has always been attracting people to go and work there. They're one of Italy's most innovative banks, great growth bank, just north of Milan. And now it's found that people want to join them from anywhere. So what COVID has done, it means that as leaders, we now know we can all work from home. What some of us haven't realized is it means that the employees can now choose who to work for. I could work for a company in Italy. An Italian living in Italy can now work for someone here in Dubai. We don't need to relocate. This opens the door. Think 2 hours either side of your time zone. You have huge access to employees, and employees have huge access to companies. The whole crowdsourcing means I don't even have to be full-time anymore, which is a benefit for everyone. So command and control is dead, and we now need these newer structures to make things happen. The dodo or the chameleon. So here's one question. Would you enthusiastically rehire your team? Having gone through what we've gone through in COVID, would you enthusiastically rehire them? And in a way, this is a trick question. There is no such thing as a bad team, just bad bosses. After all, who employed them? Who is directing them? You are. So if the team is no good, accountability sits here, not there. Which is why the next question is this. Would they enthusiastically rehire you? If the answer is yes, then you're doing something right. If the answer is no, maybe you need to be listening to what we're talking about today. One of my favorite graphs. Now, an early stage of Agile, we would say, put your individuals here. Are they A players, B players, or C players? But as we evolve into this post-industrial state, teams become more important than individuals. So here I would say, mark your teams. And we measure performance based on values as well as productivity. Values of the company, productivity as measured by its impact on achieving its strategic objectives. So I challenge you all, just do this. It takes nothing, right? I'll give you 5 minutes to do this. Draw out on a piece of paper, core values, productivity, and put there the teams, the IT team or a cross-functional team, and say, where does that team sit? If it's living the values of the company a lot and it's performing a lot, maybe it's here. Maybe it's performing highly, but it's not living the values, maybe it's here. This is the toxic area, dangerous area. That will only allow huge failure in the future. These are teams that we need to take to here. They need more autonomy, more training, more upping of their values. But normally when we do this exercise, we ask another question. Well, how do I measure core values? Well, we get into the flaky world of HR, and that is, we can't measure this. Of course you can measure it. If it's important, you measure it. What gets measured gets done. What is measured is manageable. So if you can't measure the values in your company, it just means they're not important. It's just fluff which the HR department or fluff that a consultant has put together for you. They're not core values. So stepping back a little bit, the job of a leader is not here to make people work. The job of a leader is to make it possible to do great work, define great work. So stepping back, we ask ourselves, what are the key seats, the key positions we need in our team, in our company to achieve the objectives, the BHAG, the moonshots set by our leaders? Then we need to say, of those seats, let's say here's some seats. Do we have the right people in these seats? As based on values, right? As based on competencies. And then we say, are they doing great work individually or as a team? Like Aristotle said, success is the sum total of all the parts. So whereas a great individual can do X amount of performance, a great team can do 10X. Again, the question from earlier, if you left tomorrow, would companies' performance suffer? And it all really comes down to this one here. Is your culture fit for this post-industrial age? Aristotle. So, the new way. I think I've spoken enough of why the old system doesn't work. Companies' life cycles are half what they were. CEO life cycles are half what they were. COVID has hit and brought out the ugly truth of very bad leadership and very bad management. Remember, strategy comes from the Greek, again, to win on the battlefield. The battlefield is always VUCA. It's just fat, lazy management is the reason why there is stress in the system. That's where it's at. Leaders must take full accountability for performance, not their teams. So in the new world, what are we talking about? We're talking about autonomy, which is self-rule, self-direction. We're talking about mastery, and that is better skills, right? Master the skills that we need to deliver our strategy. And of course, purpose, which gives us meaning and something to contribute, even more important for the Generation X. And out of this has come a very nice model, which I tend to quite like, by a guy called Fabian Schwartz. And it's just one model, but really it's this typical Agile model. We need purpose, right? We need to create focus, the OKRs, the 90-day plans, clear objectives. But if we do not create psychological safety and trust, then there's no way a team can step up. If every time someone says something and the boss cuts them down, they will stop coming up with suggestions. If they trust the environment you have created, where they can suggest, where they can fail, then performance becomes bigger and bigger and better. And of course, without transparency, you can't really build trust or psychological safety. And again, by having silos, you end up with lack of transparency and less trust, which is why we pitch for cross-functional teams. Just by setting 90-day goals delivered by cross-functional teams, we already start destroying silos. The objective is a new website. It's not the IT team. It's now going to be the IT team, the HR team, the finance team, the marketing team, the sales team, working as a cross-functional team to deliver, meeting daily, as we said in previous meetings, daily setting objectives, weekly setting objectives, weekly reviewing their performance as self-organizing teams with autonomy and correcting their performance because they will believe in the purpose and will deliver the goods. So this is a key model that we're going to be talking about. Give focus, create psychological safety through trust, drive it through brutal transparency. Transparency is core. And if you say, oh, I can't be transparent, I can't share the figures, I can't do that, well, ask yourself this question. When your own boss or your spouse is not transparent with you, how does that make you feel? How do you perform? So looking in the mirror sometimes helps this evolution happen much faster. If you have purpose, you know you're going to do a better job. If you trust your team, you know you can do a better job. When it's a cross-functional team, you know you have all the skills required to deliver the goods. And when the team can take its own decisions because it has a very clear focus and measures, we create the space required to win. If we do not do this, we create more friction in the system. Friction is waste. Friction slows you down. Friction costs money. Friction causes anguish with clients. Friction means death of company. So what do we want to achieve? Stephen Denning, one of the thinkers, ex-World Bank, wrote a great book called Radical Management. And in Radical Management, he says, look, number one, it's about delighting the clients. Again, Agile, where the shareholder comes second to the customer. Number two, work is organized in self-organized teams. The teams self-organize, the leaders tell them what's required, and the teams go and figure out what to do. Three, teams operate in client-driven iterations. An iteration is maybe a weekly sprint or every 2 weeks, but constantly providing incremental value to the customer. Iteration that does not add new value is not doing anything other than creating nonsense, nonsensical work. Number 4, like I just said, is this creation of value to the customers. Number 5 is all about transparency, radical transparency. Stop having daily or one-on-one reviews. One-on-one meetings are waste. If I'm the boss and I have 7 direct reports and I have to meet each one individually, and each one is 10 minutes, that's an hour lost. Or I have a rapid bang, bang, bang daily huddle of 7 minutes. I've just saved everyone hours of time. And the transparency means there's no BS allowed into the system. If someone comes to ask me something afterwards, I say, hold on, we had the daily meeting, bring it up in the morning. And depending on how they react, I know if this is a person I want on the team or not. Is this someone a sniper? Is this person a whiner? In other words, is this person playing the victim or dealing with stuff? We want people that deal with things. So transparency breeds that behavior. Managers nurture self-improvement. Right? This is the failing fast. Everyone knows that out of every 10 ideas, 9 will fail. Yet when it comes to management, we expect everyone never to fail. So how are you going to improve? On the one hand, we're saying don't fail, you lose your job, you lose your bonus. We have a meeting to correct your behavior. Or allowing people to fail constantly in small iterations to allow them to grow faster, to mend faster, to get stuff done faster. That's agile. And last, of course, is storytelling. And people in the audience right now might think it's Ed gone mad. Storytelling, what the hell's that got to do with anything? Well, think of it this way. Whether you are a Bedouin, whether you are a Kurd, whether you are a Viking, whether you're an Inuit, whether you are an Italian, it doesn't matter. Every society has one thing in common, and that is storytelling. Whether you're religious or not religious, whether you are capitalist or communist, you communicate through stories. Why? Because stories have emotion and they're easy to remember. So great leaders tell stories. They breed conversations. They ask more questions than give answers. So again, nothing new under the sun. But I'm sure this is how Alexander led, or some of the great leaders of the past. So the desired outcome is to remain relevant and profitable. Or if you're a government entity, maybe not profitable, but you want to make sure your return on funds, return on investments on equity is much higher than it is today. Governments globally have less money. Therefore, you have to be more efficient, more effective in providing services to your clients, which is the population. Otherwise, there's not enough money in the system anymore. No matter what anyone else says, COVID is going to take trillions out of the economy, of the global economy. So whether you're a government or a company, you have to be more effective in delivering value to your customer. So whereas the old pyramid system saw the boss at the top, here we're saying a different layer. We're saying let's have just 3 layers in the company. Your leaders, this is your CEO or Director General, your management, and your employees. That's it, 3 layers, you don't need more. And it's this way round because the leaders know they have to make it easy for the next level to lead and manage. And these guys also know that the only people doing the real work in the company are the employees, because that's who's interacting with the customer. So this is the upside down version. This is what we call the servant leader we spoke about in the last workshop. The servant leader creates space for the majority to do great work. And we know we're at the bottom of the food chain, not the top, what Jim Collins calls the level 5 leader. And by doing that, we end up with very happy customers. And that in turn means we stay relevant and make more money. The common sense of the agile world. So you can stay as is, right? Where complexity slows us down, all the extra layers we have, all the extra BS we have, profits will fall, services will fall, great people will leave. That's the business model. Or we can evolve. This is the dodo. On the way out, this is the company or business or economy or government that succeeds. You can either evolve or not, but again, it's a choice. If we learn to let go and create these autonomous, self-managing teams, things go faster. We allocate resources better because the allocation of resources is happening on the ground. Think how many times, I have to buy a new pen, right? But of course, there's the cabinet on the floor, which means I have to go to HR or admin, fill in a form before I can use a pen, just in case I steal it, because there's no trust. How many times does that happen every day? How many hours is left every day? Performance management systems, we all know they are useless. Who's actually hand on heart can say the performance management system in their company actually increased performance of the company by a real measurable, quantifiable amount? I bet you can't prove that point. So why on earth do we waste millions of hours a year on these one-on-one meetings and the systems to keep them? So by letting go, by making things into smaller bites, they're easier to see the impact we're having. And yes, there'll be a dip, but over time, it's been proven things have happened. And I'll use Microsoft as the classic example, right? They were on the way to irrelevance until they changed their direction and started implementing these principles. And they're still on that journey 10 years on, and they're still nowhere near the end. So next step is really to ask yourself, how can I create autonomy, mastery, and purpose in my teams? Autonomy, self-direction, self-auto rule. Mastery, become masters at my skills, whether it's digital marketing, whether it's coding, whether it's customer relationships, whatever. And purpose, why do I exist? As a government entity, as a company, as a department. The beautiful book on this one is Drive, simply because it's very well written and it's small. We all know most books are written nice and thick, when we all know the whole thing could have been summarized in 2 pages, but that's the way things are. And we do this better, then we realize the business model itself is delivered more effectively. People are no longer questioning things. They're actually having fun because they can see the value they're doing, the living purpose, making a difference in the world, and therefore they're able to deliver better value to the customer, who then chooses to work with them, not others. Or if there's no choice, like in a government entity, at least the customer is now enjoying it. And the chances are things are getting improved, but we need to expedite that. So trust comes first. You can't have any of this unless you build trust through transparency, through self-organizing cross-functional teams. Cross-functional transparency are critical in this process. 2 great books by Keith Ferrazzi. But behind that book is obviously this whole system that we're talking about, right? Understanding these 12 principles, these 12 traits, enables you to grow these self-organizing teams. It's hard, but like my dad said, no pain, no gain. Don't expect transformation to be painless. When a caterpillar turns into a butterfly, I'm sure it's painful. Transformation is painful which is why in the system we want to iterative, small baby steps. Right? And the first thing is how to build trust in the team. No trust means you have command and control. You have to command and control, because if you don't, you will screw up and lose your job as a boss. And because it's so busy in VUCA, you haven't got time to build trust. You haven't got the time for all this fluff. Well, unfortunately, if that does happen and you don't create the time, performance will ultimately deteriorate consistently and you will end up jobless. So success is really the sum total of all the decisions you take. Right? You've got a bad boss, you work in a bad company, your choice. Don't play the victim. Right? It's your choice, not put a gun to your head to work there. Success is the sum total of all the decisions you take. So hopefully these 7 little steps we showed in the model and the 12 traits are all food for thought for you to start experimenting with. Small experiments. You can start with, when you get a piece of paper in front of you and you start working on it, just stop and ask yourself, hold on, give it back to the person and say, work on it. Let go. Everything comes to your desk. Give it back or ask a simple question. Before I read this, is this the best you can do? And if the person hesitates, just give it back and say, come back. Don't waste each other's time. It's a marathon, not a race. Sometimes we get caught up in the rush of the craziness of COVID. But it's not a race. This is a marathon. The virus isn't going away. There's never been a cure to coronavirus. So let's assume it's not going to come, right? If it comes, good. But let's believe on the brutal facts, not believe in stuff that we have no proof points on. We have to train for a marathon, not a race, which is why we come back to these baby steps, right? Build an experiment. You have a hypothesis. Hypothesis could be, if I stop telling my team what to do this week, what will happen? So I build a test. Right? From the test, I then implement it. I measure. If I give back to the team, the measurement might be escalations. Today I have 5 escalations a week. Let's see if that changes. If nothing changes, I've learned something. And I go on to the next test. And I do it again. So a systematic approach will slowly create these teams we're talking about. When you're setting goals, instead of setting a goal in your team, invite other teams. Ask yourself, what are all the teams required to deliver the new website, the new service delivery? Put them all together, work together, come up with a solution. So some of this can be quite daunting, moving from command and control to servant leadership. But like the old adage goes, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And this is where that whole process from the lean startup comes in. Build, measure, learn. If you're familiar with agile systems such as Scrum, it's called the OODA, observe, orient, decide, act. But it's the same thing. So I've got 5 more minutes. And I want to now move into something about culture. So we said there's different traits. We said a high performance model has 7 traits, 6 traits. Purpose. Purpose gives mastery and autonomy. Trust. Trust allows us to have connectivity with each other. It allows us to own things when we have a trusting environment. Transparency is like a shared consciousness, like the ants. Ants get work done, right? Because of a shared consciousness that's allowed because of transparency. Transparency creates shared consensus and consciousness. What would you improve in your team if you had all this? Yeah. More transparency would lead to more ownership, more empowerment, more autonomy, and more performance. The fourth thing was focus. Brutal focus, 90-day objectives, 7-day objectives, 1-day objectives. Cross-functional teams, build skills. We want a T-shaped, not a specialist. The modern world is not about specialism anymore. It's about having a T-shape, a bunch of specialists coming together, constantly in a cross-functional team, shares knowledge, which is scary for people like to hold knowledge because knowledge is power. But that will slow down a team. Psychological safety, which is the core of what we're talking about. Okay, so these are things that the stepping stones that we're talking about. But if we want to do this, we can actually try and think about how the hell do we design a culture? Can we design a culture? Well, I think we can. This is from the Strategizer toolset, the people that do the tool behind me, the business model canvas. You can cultivate a garden and you can cultivate a culture. What you need to do is ask yourself, what are the outcomes we want? What sort of outcomes do we want? An innovation culture? Do we want to be market leader? Do we want to sell 40 bags of potatoes a week? What are the outcomes? What are the key results this team has got to build, to create? Then we can ask, what are the behaviors that we need to create these outcomes? And then we can say, what are the things we need to do to enable these behaviors? For example, a behavior of transparency. The enabler would be daily huddles. Every morning, a cross-functional team comes together and says, this is what we're doing today. Imagine if Director General or the CEO has a daily huddle. 7-minute meeting, that's all it is, where everyone that reports in says, this is what I'm doing today, this is what I did since yesterday, this is where I need help. Brutal transparency in 7 minutes every day creates the behaviors we want. Likewise, we can also say, these are the outcomes we are receiving today. These are the behaviors we are seeing today. What are the things happening that create those behaviors? Think of the Teflon shoulder, blamestorming versus brainstorming. Behaviors of finger pointing. Coming back to Celine Bassoul's model, snipers are people that are always putting other people down. Whiners are those people that are always playing the victims. Oh, COVID is at fault, therefore we can't sell. Right? Or, oh, I couldn't do that because IT didn't have the IT system working. That's just playing the victim. Right? That's not the behaviors we want. So you can write all the things down on this sheet and play with it. Right? Do it with your team. Here's an example. Amazon, right? Down here we can see 1997, the outcome they wanted was 147 million revenue. Another outcome they wanted was growth, and they wanted to pursue e-commerce opportunities in not just books. So what behaviors we need to create these outcomes? Obsession with the customer, right? Willingness to fail, patience to think long-term. Of every 9 experiments, 10 experiments, 9 will fail. And people that act as owners, what we call the entrepreneurial mindset, where taking risks is what we want. So these behaviors to create the outcomes they wanted in 1997. And then they said, okay, so how do we enable this? Or what are blocking us? So blockage was this thing here, short-term profitability consideration. Goes to the stock market. That was something that was stopping the behaviors they wanted. Whereas things that would enable it was investing in employees and bold investments without certainty, taking risks. Let's move forward to 2018. Right? They want to be 117 billion. Right? They want AWS, Amazon Web Services, 1830 billion. They want to fulfillment and the prime measurement, the prime service to be number 1. And then they ask themselves the same processes and also identifying what's blocking them. So the tool can be used constantly to think. It's a visual tool like everything in Agile, and you can map the current and you can map to the future. Right? So use it for current. This is the current state. This is what the outcomes we're experiencing today. COVID has come, sales have gone down. What behaviors led to that? Blaming the market, blaming the supply chain, blaming COVID, right? Other behaviors, like command and control. What's creating those behaviors? And then saying, okay, let's look at the future. We want resilience, right? We want to grow. We want to stay relevant. What the new behaviors we need. And then design the things that create that, daily huddles, right? Weekly planning cycles, or other enablers. It's a very, very powerful tool, which you can get from Strategizer, or just draw it yourself. It's not very difficult. But behind it all is this victor-victim mentality. Okay, this is a company here in Dubai. And they didn't invent this. This is old. But really, it's your choice. Remember? Success is the sum total of all the decisions you take as an individual. You can either choose to be the victim or choose to be the victor. It's your choice where you want to play. You start blaming the environment, blaming the boss, blaming the country, blaming things, you're down here. Excuses, denial. Ownership means it's happened. The goods didn't ship on time. I don't make excuses. I deal with it. I own it. I'm responsible for it. I take account for it. I move forward, accepting mistakes as they are. So, old saying from the 60s or 50s, culture eats strategy for breakfast. If you create the company culture and you focus on creating a company culture for the future, not the past, you'll survive, you'll build resilience, you will have high performance. But if you carry on living in the past, even if it is successful today, it will not be successful tomorrow, because the digital age is very different from the industrial age. And what worked before will not work for the future. Even if it's working today, it will not last long as your industry, as your job becomes disrupted by the digital age, because everything will be disrupted. So that's about it for today. I'll now open the floor for questions. We have 10 questions, and let's answer them. So I have a question from Mohammed. From my experience, it seems that a contributing factor to enforcement is a narrow focus of employees on income only. As such, okay, good. Well, that's an assumption for a start, okay? And at the end of the day, we all know people in an expat society are mostly here for the money. But we also know everyone wants to belong and everyone needs to feel part of something bigger. So the point is, you need to run experiments, Mohammed, right? And saying that narrow focus of employees, well, that's also a narrow focus of the employer, assuming that. Most employees believe the employer here is super rich, right? Employees always think the owners are a lot richer than they are. By being transparent on the book, so here you have in front of you something called open book management down here, right? So I've got clients here in Dubai that have open books with their employees. And those employees are in the manufacturing industry from Nepal, from Bangladesh, from India, very low paid, low skilled jobs. They're being educated in what the company's earning. And that's helping them understand their role. And it's incredibly powerful because they feel part of something. And if you are the sort of employer that's making too much money, well, that now becomes transparent. If you're not happy in giving back, well, that's your call, right? Greed, that could be your situation. This doesn't work in the greedy situation. And Mohammed, so in short, they do not want to put the effort to becoming self-managing. I think that's complete nonsense. I'm sorry, right? I've been here 18 years, 19 years, and I can see when you start running these experiments, amazing things happen. Right? Come back to culture. If you haven't been clear what the culture is, right? That could be a violent culture or a very saintly culture, it doesn't matter. If your culture is not super clear, then that's your problem because you've hired the wrong people. If you're not setting very clear goals with them, then they will not feel empowered. And furthermore, if you're always jumping in, saving a day, then of course you're letting them off the hook. But that's like a parent not giving good guidance to their children. So no, you have to experiment with this because ultimately someone else would. And because the world is becoming more digital, globalization crosses boundaries very, very easily now. This is why governments are up in arms against the Facebooks, because the new government is the Facebook, because the new government is digital. It transcends boundaries. Right? This is why so many people buy from Amazon here. Very bad service from retail means why would I spend money with someone when I can ship it from some other country? Is that Amazon being nasty? No, Amazon's serving the customer. The local entity maybe isn't serving the customer and is therefore now paying the price. And if they've got, you can go into many of these shops, right? You can see how people just don't care about working there because they're probably being treated like dirt. I was in a restaurant, the waiter doesn't care. Well, of course he doesn't care. He's just had a 50% cut in his wages. Why should he care? I bet the boss is still making the money. So these are challenging times, but without changing, without facing status quo, the company will not survive because someone else will deliver better service. Sorry, Mr. Mawson, for attacking you there, but I just want to use that as an example. Yeah, I'm just attacking the concept as opposed to how to deal with this. So let go little bit by little bit. An old colleague of mine took over SAP here about, 10 years ago. And one of his first moves was, what did he say? He said, escalation is a sign of failure. Okay, so that made it very clear to the people below him. If you escalate, that's failure. Now, obviously, not escalating and hiding things would have been dealt with severely. But what he was doing was stopping the immediate, not my problem, shifting blame situation that happened in that company. Other questions? We've got another couple of minutes. Okay, good. Yeah, the Drive books, the Stig, brilliant. Very, very good. Yeah. It's a wonderful book and it really captures the spirit of the post-industrial workspace. But I highly recommend Radical Management, the Stephen Denning book. That's this one here. I'll go back a few slides to find it. Anyway, so here we go, this one here. Very powerful book, which really explains the drive in even deeper ways. So it's almost like a manual of how you can move into this sort of space. Good, thank you, Nina. I hope it was enjoyable. And like I said, run experiments. Remember, the leader of the future sits at the bottom and realizes to create space for the people above and has the right metrics to ensure we don't lose any sort of sleep at night. And with that, I shall love you and leave you. Good. Thank you. And see you again soon.